You're famous in Baker Street, Mrs. Gresty. Our housekeeper, Mrs. Hudson, put us on to you.
Mrs. Hudson?
Ah, Mrs. Hudson, a name that may not steal the spotlight, but resonates with anyone familiar with the world of Sherlock Holmes. The landlady of 221B Baker Street, her presence is a quiet constant in the whirlwind of mysteries and deductions. But who is this enigmatic figure? And what makes her indispensable for the Holmes universe? In this video, we will explore Mrs. Hudson's role in Sherlock Holmes universe and discuss why she deserves more appreciation.
The curious case of Mrs. Hudson, the absentee landlady. I've been studying her comings and goings. They appear most sinister.
These past holidays, I found myself indulging in a watch party of Sherlock Holmes adventures with Jeremy Brett in the leading part. And then, suddenly, a third evening in a row, I caught myself on a striking feeling. Like, wait a minute, it's strange, yet suddenly I began to feel disconnected from the series. It felt like the third episode I watched was identical to the previous ones. I couldn't even tell the difference. Oh, no way, right? Isn't the Jeremy Brett version of this canonical saga believed to be the one and the best?
You all right, old man?
Well, yeah, I thought to myself. The actor is brilliant, no doubt, but somehow the entourage around him looked pretty much the same. The same old and bold aristocrats crawling down the stairs of their family mansions, the same sort of goofy police inspectors, the same impossibly naive male clerks or some minor citizens who rush to the great detective in hope of solving their misfortunes.
I'm sorry to disturb you, Mr. Holmes.
Peterson. Put down your goose.
I'm exaggerating, of course, yet where are all the female characters in this world? It looks like if a lady is allowed in this universe, she's obligatory falling into one and the same archetype, an obedient and meek sheep, lost in the fields full of scary wolves and ruthless hunters for her unspoiled soul and unblemished honor.
There was something on his mind.
For long?
Only the last week or two. Once I asked him about it. It is too serious to speak about even to you, he said.
Oh, come on, and that's it? Well, I understand that in the late 19th century, when Sir Arthur Conan Doyle was originally coming up with his detective short stories, this was the predominant view on the woman's role, not just in books, but, well, in society. Perhaps this was another reason for the further mind-blowing success of Dame Agatha Christie, who dared to seriously expand the cast of characters in this previously male-only genre of detective mystery.
If you please, Miss Lemon, do you have 2 pennies?
For a tip, Mr. Poirot?
For the telephone, Miss Lemon.
I think that our contemporary film and series producers did notice that discrepancy in Doyle narrative and tried to add some more relatable storylines, which would include real and not imaginary perfect images of women in plots.
There's another bedroom upstairs if you've been needing 2 bedrooms.
Of course we'll be needing 2.
Oh, don't worry, there's all sorts around here. Mrs. Turner next door's got married once.
Yet it seems that in the late 1980s and early 1990s, they were still quite far from daring to make Doyle's creation a somewhat more diverse digression.
I'll stop if you let me kiss you.
Kiss? You kissed me, Jack. Where?
Well, in any case, it looks like the image of Mrs. Hudson, Sherlock's old housemaid, is the only female character that was originally meant to be made of flesh and blood, and not just an imaginative spirit-like qualities. And it's obviously sad that we, the ones who watch the series and movies about this famous private detective now, are sort of deprived of her perky character, which, in my opinion, certainly deserves more screen time and attention.
Oh, Mrs. Hudson!
Introduced in author Conan Doyle's very first Holmes story, A Study in Scarlet, from 1887, Mrs. Hudson is not your ordinary tough-as-nails landlady. While the texts don't offer an abundance of detail about her life, her character is a cornerstone of stability in the chaotic, often dangerous life of Sherlock Holmes and Dr. Watson. She's a motherly figure, a keeper of the peace, when peace can be found in a home shared with the world's greatest detective.
Oh, Mr. Holmes, this is the last straw.
The last straw, Mrs. Hudson. It proves beyond a shadow of doubt that, even bound as he claims he was, he could still have fired the shot in his own defense that killed his wife's lover.
But shooting holes in my beautiful plaster.
Or, if we stay less poetic and stick more to the bare facts, the books reveal only a few details about Mrs. Hudson. She isn't much of a cook, though she has a good sense of breakfast. She might have Scottish origins. We get no clear idea of whether she had ever been married, and yes, she just tolerates Holmes as her tenant, along with his eccentric guests, primarily because he pays an excellent, princely rent for the space. At the same time, it often feels, or perhaps it's a wishful thinking, that she's a silent supporter, a witness to genius in action, and occasionally a reluctant participant in Holmes' escapades. In Doyle's stories, Mrs. Hudson rarely takes center stage, yet when she does, her actions speak volumes. For example, in The Adventure of the Dying Detective, she plays a pivotal role in luring Dr. Watson to Holmes' aid.
I just hope you'll be careful, that's all. You're not as young as you were. We know what Mr. Holmes is like once he gets the bit between his teeth.
And let's not forget her brave nature, housing Holmes despite the dangers that often come knocking at her door. As that very Dr. Watson would brilliantly summarize, the landlady stood in the deepest awe of him, Sherlock, and never dared to interfere with him, however outrageous his proceedings might seem. She was fond of him, too, for he had a remarkable gentleness and courtesy in his dealings with women. Some fans speculate on her backstory. Was she truly just a landlady, or did she have secrets of her own? Her ability to endure Holmes' antics and the occasional intrusion of criminal elements hints at a strength forged through experience. Some adaptations even suggest she might have been involved in espionage and had a connection to Scotland Yard.
Scotland Yard, quick!
Oh, my goodness!
An intriguing possibility that fuels endless fan theories. Well, while these suggestions are debatable, they might be attributed to that initial absence of the Doyle's interest in developing female protagonists as a class, a trait quite common for his epoch, yet almost unimaginable for the viewers and readers of today. And perhaps this lack of information clues about her tricks us into inventing it ourselves, like there has to be something behind her, right? In this perspective, Mrs. Hudson reminds us of the unsung heroes or heroines in every great story. She's not solving crimes or battling villains, but she provides the foundation, a home, a sanctuary that allows genius to flourish. She is proof that even in the shadow of extraordinary figures like Holmes, the ordinary can be extraordinary in its own right.
He said I wasn't to let this out of my sight until I placed it into your own hands.
Mrs. Hudson, you are a most faithful watchdog.
Oh.
Could the crowd favorite Miss Marple by Christie have been influenced hypothetically, by the personality of Sherlock's landlady. Well, that might be too much of a stretch, of course. You may learn about who actually stood behind Maple's character in my detailed, dedicated video. Perhaps readers of all times sense that there is a much bigger potential in this character of Doyle's. And here where it gets fascinating, Mrs. Hudson began to independently evolve with every screen adaptation. If in the original canon she is depicted as elderly and genteel, a Victorian widow managing her property with grace, in modern retellings her personality gains new dimensions.
Good evening, Mrs. Hudson.
Oh, why, it's Mr. Holmes.
Mary Gordon was one of the first actresses in the sequence of notable portrayals of Mrs. Hudson on screen. As Scottish actress, she starred in the Sherlock Holmes film series alongside Basil Rathbone and Nigel Bruce. She appeared as Mrs. Hudson in 10 movies from 1939 to 1946. Gordon's portrayal set a standard for the character during that era.
And Mrs. Hudson, you're hideously in the way.
I'm sorry, sir, but I only have one pair of hands.
Please disappear.
An English actress, Rosalie Williams, played Mrs. Hudson in the Granada television series The Adventures of Sherlock Holmes with Jeremy Brett in the titular part. The series we began our talk with today aired from 1984 to 1994, and Williams's depiction of Mrs. Hudson was both warm and authoritative, embodying the Victorian essence of the character.
Isn't it hateful?
Oh, I'm sure something will turn up, Sherlock. A nice murder. That'll cheer you up.
Can't come too soon.
The BBC's Sherlock with Benedict Cumberbatch reimagined Hudson as a sharp-witted woman with a hint of sass, unafraid to call out Sherlock's quirks. Una Stubbs' portrayal brought warmth and humor to the character, endearing her to a new generation of fans. Her performance was widely acclaimed, and the actress became closely associated with the role until her passing in 2021.
Tea, Mr. Holmes.
Is it poisoned, Nanny?
There's enough of that in you already.
In the recent movies, one can remember the English Geraldine James. She played Hudson in the 2009 film Sherlock Holmes and its 2011 sequel, Sherlock Holmes: A Game of Shadows, both directed by Guy Ritchie. Her portrayal provided a subtle yet memorable presence, complementing Robert Downey Jr.'s Holmes and Jude Law's Watson. I personally enjoyed their on-screen chemistry a lot. And as for the notable international adaptations, critics often cite the Russian actress Marina, who took the role of Mrs. Hudson in a widely acclaimed Soviet television film series, The Adventures of Sherlock Holmes and Dr. Watson, which aired from 1979 to 1986. Obviously, there were many more actresses whom I didn't mention today, and who would be your favorite in this role? And do you agree that Sherlock stories would benefit from featuring more female perspectives of life at the time? Since Mrs. Hudson might not be out there solving crimes or chasing down villains, but her strength, resilience, and quiet support make her absolutely essential.
Even so trivial a matter as cooking an egg demands an attention, which is incompatible with a love romance in that excellent periodical.
Hope Mrs. Hudson is enjoying her holiday.
She is the steady anchor that keeps Sherlock grounded, giving him the space to do his thing. It's a good reminder that even the greatest minds need someone holding it all together behind the scenes. I think she deserves way more credit than she gets. Let's discuss all that in the comments. Thank you for tuning in, and I hope to see you in my other videos. Bye!